Hands up who instinctively thinks that this proposition that should science be employed in the right ways, in theory, we can all live hundreds and hundreds of years. Who thinks that on the whole that is probably a very bad idea, not just for ourselves but for society as a whole?
This preconception that it's a good thing that we have aging and it would be a bad thing if we didn't. There is a misconception about the underlying principles. Hands up anyone in the audience who wants to get Alzheimer's disease. Hands up anyone who thinks there is some age at which they would like to get Alzheimer's disease. I don't have any takers there either. Cardiovascular disease or cancer. That you think you cannot want all those things, but you do want aging. That's not possible. These are all parts and parcel of aging. You can't have one without the other. We are not going to get rid of the diseases and disabilities of old age without getting rid of aging. Get over it. The lucky people, if you could call them lucky, whose declining years are of the sort that you've just described, just happen to get some of the aspects of aging later than others, and therefore they end up dying of things that we choose not to give disease-like names to. But it's still no fun going downhill and becoming mentally and physically less functional. I decided when I was really young that I wanted to make a difference in the world. And that eventually led me into science. For several years I worked in artificial intelligence research. And then when I was in my late 20s, I switched careers and became a biologist. And the reason I did so was because I found out that hardly anyone was working on the world's most important problem, namely the fact that we get sick when we were born a long time ago, and then we die.
How many people die of aging every day? The answer is 100,000. And of course, most of them don't just die, they die after a long period of disease and debilitation and decrepitude and decline and dependency and general misery. So there is no question that aging is responsible for the vast majority of human suffering in the world today.
What is aging? It's a phenomenon of physics, which is to say it's the same process in the human body or in any other living organism that it is in a car. It's the accumulation of damage that the machine does to itself throughout its operation as a side effect of the normal operation of the machine. If you have too much, you go downhill. That's what most people think. But this is how you ought to think. The diseases, the chronic progressive diseases of old age, are not really diseases at all. They are not things that can be cured. They are parts of aging. The way that we've tried to go about keeping people healthy in old age is obviously never going to work. Instead, we can separate the arrows from each other. We can go in and periodically repair the damage so that even though it's being created at the natural rate, nevertheless, it will not actually accumulate to the point where it's bad for you. It's what we already successfully do with simpler machines. If it's so simple, if it's so obvious, then why the hell do I have to come and give these bloody talks? The answer really is, people are shit scared of getting their hopes up, of believing that after the entire history of civilization having failed to bring the world's most important problem under control, that finally we might be in striking distance of doing it. Nobody wants to get their hopes up. So they like to make their peace with aging and put it out of their minds and get on with their miserably short lives and make the best of it. But I say that's bullshit. I say that we ought to fight to actually save some lives, and that's why I'm saying we need to wake up and act decisively. It turns out that we can. This categorization, this classification really is actually exhaustive. There's not some category number 8 lurking out there waiting to be discovered.
What I mean by health is not being healthy for your age, which is this complete contradiction in terms that people are so fond of. And the way I describe that in terms that people can really get their heads around is I say, I'm talking about actually being able to keep up with your granddaughter on the dance floor. Now, that actually has ramifications for your question, because the fact is if you can't keep up with your granddaughter on the dance floor, then you're probably going to be rather more exposed to the music that your granddaughter likes than you otherwise would be. And this kind of stratification of what people are exposed to, what people are familiar with, is, to my mind, a huge cause of the political stratification that you're describing.
Sure, it's clear that atherosclerosis is a disease of Western diet. It's very much more prevalent now than it used to be. But if you look at the actual life expectancy aspect, then it's not very encouraging. If we just completely eliminated all heart attacks and strokes, then we would only live about 5 years longer. If we 100% eliminated them. And of course, these changes to diet don't by any means 100% eliminate them. So we're still talking a very small amount of difference in terms of life expectancy.
Across the board, whether it's overpopulation you're worried about, or boredom, or dictators living forever, or how will we pay the pensions, or any of these standard knee-jerk reactions. The answer is, how bad could it be? Let's have a sense of proportion about this. How bad could these problems be relative to the severity of the problem we have today? How many people die of aging every day? The answer is 100,000. And of course, most of them don't just die, they die after a long period of disease and debilitation and decrepitude and decline and dependency and general misery. So there is no question that aging is responsible for the vast majority of human suffering in the world today. We have to ask, even supposing that we ended up in a situation where population was going to be a problem because we hadn't invented technologies to fix that, to increase the carrying capacity of the planet quite as rapidly as we needed to. So we were faced with this, rather irritating feature of having to have fewer children than we would like in order to make room for all these elderly who are still healthy and not dying. How bad is that? Seems to me to be, it's hard to make a case that the right thing to do would be to let the people age and die rather than to have fewer kids. Well, even if you've convinced yourself that these problems are going to happen, and even if you've also convinced yourself that these problems are going to be so bad that they might outweigh the problem that we're solving, the question is, who are you to say? Who should actually be making the decision as to whether these therapies are used? The answer clearly is humanity of the future rather than humanity of the present. If we say to ourselves, oh dear, overpopulation, whatever, let's not go there, and we thereby, delay the development of these therapies, then what we would be doing is denying humanity of the future the option whether to use these therapies based on the information that it had available to it about, available technologies or whatever. Whereas if we develop these things as fast as possible, then humanity in the future does get the choice. Now, I do not want to be someone who is helping to condemn a whole cohort of the future to an unnecessarily painful and unnecessarily early death just because I thought I knew better than that.